Commander Jhulk had seen many battles in his time, but nothing like this. His people, the Thraxians, were known for their resilience, their ability to endure the harshest conditions and come out victorious. They were renowned as the most durable species in the galaxy, until humans arrived on the galactic stage. Jhulk had been skeptical when the Galactic Coalition assigned a human, Corporal Mason Reeves, to his squad for their next mission. It was a simple extraction: retrieve data from an abandoned military outpost on the hostile moon of Norex, a barren, windswept wasteland that had claimed the lives of many Thraxian soldiers in past skirmishes. Mason had been quiet, almost aloof, during the briefing. Jhulk had heard the stories of humans, Deathworlders, born on a planet so treacherous that everything from the atmosphere to the wildlife was a danger. But stories were one thing. The reality of it remained to be seen. The mission had started smoothly enough. Mason was efficient and focused, keeping pace with the Thraxians as they moved through the crumbling outpost, encountering little resistance. It was a ghost facility, nothing alive, except the sharp wind and the occasional groan of metal. Then, things went wrong. As they entered the core of the facility, the floor beneath them gave way, sending Jhulk and Mason tumbling into a lower chamber. Jhulk landed hard, but unscathed. Mason, on the other hand, let out a grunt of pain as his leg caught on a jagged piece of metal, slicing it open from knee to ankle. Jhulk's eyes widened in horror at the sight of the gash. Blood poured from the wound, soaking Mason's pants, and Jhulk's first instinct was to call for an immediate evac. The human wasn't going to make it. He could already see the signs of shock setting in, the paleness, the tremble in his hand as he reached for his sidearm. "Stay still," Jhulk ordered, crouching down beside him. "We'll call for extraction. You're badly injured." Mason looked down at his leg, frowning, as if assessing the damage. To Jhulk's amazement, he barely flinched. There was no scream, no panic, just a deep breath, as if this was an inconvenience more than anything else. "Nah, we don't have time for that," Mason said, gritting his teeth as he reached into his pack, pulling out a med kit. He began to wrap a tourniquet around his leg with swift, practiced movements, his face calm despite the blood still oozing from the wound. Jhulk stared, incredulous. "You're losing too much blood. We need to get you back to the ship." "No," Mason cut him off, tightening the tourniquet until the blood flow slowed to a trickle. "We need to finish the mission." Jhulk blinked in disbelief. "You can't be serious. You need medical attention, now." Mason locked eyes with him, his voice steady. "I'm not leaving this place without that data. We finish what we came here to do." Jhulk had faced enemies with superior firepower, creatures twice his size, and environments that would crush lesser beings, but he had never seen anything like this. Mason had just suffered a catastrophic injury, and yet he was brushing it off as if it were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Reluctantly, Jhulk nodded, but the situation was dire. They still had to retrieve the data core from deep within the facility, and Mason's injury would slow them down. The human, however, didn't seem to care. They moved on, with Mason hobbling slightly but keeping pace. Jhulk could hear the slight hitch in his breath, the occasional grunt of pain, but he continued to push forward. Every step was labored, but Mason was determined. "How can you endure this?" Jhulk finally asked as they stopped to hack into a secure terminal. He had to know. "Your leg, you should be incapacitated." Mason glanced at him with a small, humorless smile. "You get used to pain, Commander. Where I come from, pain is just part of life. You learn to live with it, push through it." Jhulk's mind reeled. The Thraxians prided themselves on their toughness, but this was something else entirely. No Thraxian would be able to operate under these conditions. Pain was a signal that the body had reached its limit. But humans, they seemed to have no such limit. They reached the data core chamber, and Mason wasted no time plugging into the system. Jhulk watched as he worked, noticing how Mason's hands trembled only slightly as he fought through the pain. Every second felt like an eternity as the data began downloading. Then, the alarms went off. A security protocol had triggered, and the facility's automated defense systems activated. Turrets descended from the ceiling, and before Jhulk could react, one fired a volley of energy blast toward them. He ducked behind a console, returning fire, but Mason had no cover. Jhulk's heart sank as one of the blasts hit Mason in the side, sending him sprawling to the floor. Mason, Jhulk rushed over, his eyes wide with fear. The human's breathing was ragged, and the blast had burned through his armor, leaving a charred wound along his ribcage. Blood seeped through his shirt, mixing with the blood already pooling from his leg. But Mason didn't stop. With shaking hands, he finished the download, yanking the data core free and handing it to Jhulk. "Get this to the ship," Mason wheezed, his face pale but his voice still steady. "I'll cover you." Jhulk stared at him, completely stunned. "You can't possibly fight in this condition." Mason managed a weak grin, lifting his rifle. "You'd be surprised what a human can do when they have to." Before Jhulk could argue, Mason was already firing at the turrets, his shots precise despite the agony he must have been feeling. Jhulk hesitated for only a moment before running toward the exit, data core in hand. As they made their way out of the facility, Mason somehow kept pace, even as his injuries worsened. Jhulk knew the human was pushing his body far beyond its limits, but he refused to stop. Every time Jhulk offered to help, Mason waved him off. By the time they reached the extraction point, Mason was barely standing, his body shaking with exhaustion and blood loss. Jhulk called for immediate medical evac, his respect for the human growing with each second. As they boarded the ship, Jhulk couldn't help but ask, "Why didn't you stop?" No one would have blamed you. Mason leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes as the medics rushed to tend to his wounds. "Because, Commander, that's just what we do. We don't quit, not until the mission is done." Jhulk nodded slowly, understanding dawning on him. The stories were true. Humans weren't just resilient, they were relentless. They pushed through pain, fear, and the impossible because they refused to let anything stand in their way. Pain, to them, was just another obstacle to overcome. As the ship lifted off, Jhulk realized that the galaxy's greatest warriors weren't the ones who avoided pain or injury. They were the ones who embraced it and kept fighting anyway.